A question I get a lot is, how do I find the right flight instructor? And this is such a good question because honestly, finding the right or wrong flight instructor can make or break your flying experience. And I would go as far as to say it might even be the determining factor as to whether or not you finish your pilot's license. Your instructor is your mentor, right? And you might have many instructors, but they are really formative for you in your flying experience. And so I want to dive right into this. I'm not an instructor myself, but I've flown with tons over the course of time, and I can give you my perspective on this. So first off, how many instructors should you have? Well, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. In my own experience, I like having several because each one will have kind of their own little tips and tricks, their little quirks and stuff, and you can just kind of learn more from them. Obviously, there's some situations where you're just going to have one that might take you through the entire process, and there's nothing wrong with that. I know in more rural settings, that might be your only option. If you're training with a flight school, personally, I like to be able to boil it down to kind of 2 to 3 people that kind of know you, know your body language, and they can keep up with kind of where you are in your flight progression and your training, and so you're not having to kind of reintroduce yourself every time you show up at the school. I've kind of been through that too, but I think if you can, end up with 1 to 3 instructors. For me personally, that's kind of a sweet spot, but there's not a right or wrong answer. As far as where to find the flight instructor, obviously the internet is your friend here, Googling around for them. There's also some directories, like Gleam has one, where they'll have a registry of flight instructors by geography, and it usually has their contact information as well. But one other thing I would consider doing, especially if you're in more rural settings, is to actually call the airport managers, maybe even mechanics based at the airport, and ask them who they know. Hey, who are the flight instructors in town or in neighboring cities? They're going to be able to point you in the right direction. Because sometimes, even the really, really good ones might not have like any online presence. It's pretty funny. And so you might have to go offline to track them down. Now, the big question is, what do you look for in a CFI? I've been fortunate to have flown with dozens of flight instructors over the course of my training, and in preparation for this video, I really did look back and reflect on what were some of the traits and characteristics that made me gravitate towards some CFIs and maybe not as much towards others. And so I want to preface this by saying nobody's perfect. And so if you're looking for the perfect CFI out there, they don't exist. They've all got quirks. We're all human, right? But I do think there are traits that have become really important to me as I look for CFIs. And so as you kind of review these, you might be on the opposite end of the spectrum. You might think, yeah, Charlie kind of leans this way. I might be looking for someone that leans more this other way. And that's totally fine. But after many years of training, here are the traits that I look for in a CFI. The first trait is attitude. Are they there because they care about your learning, or are they there solely for the purpose of building hours? Obviously, a lot of CFIs are CFIs because they're trying to work on their hours for the airlines, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great way to build time. But I have found that there's kind of 2 different instructors in that category. There's ones that are only there for the time, to build their time, and they will lament the fact that they are CFIs, and they'll even tell you that, while you're on the lesson, like, yeah, man, I've only got 300 to go and then I'm out of here or whatever. Like, how does that help you prep for a lesson as you're walking out to the airplane? Like, as a student, is that really what you want to hear? Or there are instructors that are fully planning on going to the airlines when they have enough hours, but even still, they know this is the season they're in. And so they have the important job of training people. And so even though they know this is kind of a means to an end, they can still really lock into their current job and say, hey, while I'm here, I have a really important duty here. And so I want to make an impact in the lives of my students. So if you do have a CFI that's just building time, I think you'll pick up pretty quickly on which end of the spectrum they're there. And I would definitely stay away from the ones that just really hate being a CFI. On the other hand, you might find someone that isn't building time at all. They just love being a CFI, and that's even better. So I think regardless of where your CFI is trying to go, if it's a means to an end or this is the end goal of being a CFI, just make sure that they are invested in your training, because that is going to make them complacent or not complacent when they're in the right seat next to you, and you definitely want someone who's really invested in you. The second trait I look for is their teaching style. Do they ask questions to help you learn, or do they just give you the answers? Or said another way, do they just give you a fish, or do they teach you how to fish? The ones that I have loved the most really help me think through problems, and they don't just give me an answer to the point where I can rely on them as a crutch, because in the end, like, that doesn't help you as a PIC to just get used to having this instructor that if you just ask the question, they're always just going to tell you the answer so they can move on. I really love the instructors that help you go find the answer. So if you're in pre-flight or something and they're asking you about, hey, clouds, what airspace are we in? Hey, given that, what are the cloud clearance requirements or something, and you're having a hard time coming up with it, I really love the ones that will, if you're stumbling, they'll be like, hey, well, where can we go find that information? And then you go find the information. Like, that helps you more than them just saying, oh yeah, it's this, right? And so obviously not everything can be taught with the Socratic method and asking you questions all the time. So it's a big riddle like that. That's not helping anybody. But I think in the right situations, I love the instructors that will even let you kind of mess up. If you're like, oh, well, hey, how can we, can we program the GPS this way or something? They'll say, I don't know, can you? Like, they're not always just going to give you a crutch. Those are the ones that I've really loved. I find that helps me really actually learn the subject more than just relying on someone to give me the answer. The third trait, and this is a big one, is surprises. And I would also group risk tolerance into this as well. I've heard so many nightmare stories about CFIs that maybe in an effort to teach, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, or maybe just in an effort to look cool or something, I'm not sure. They pull all these surprises on their students, like they'll put the aircraft into a spin or something when they had never even briefed spins or talked about how to recover from them. I hate hearing stories like that, and I don't want to fly with CFIs that are trying to kind of push the limits or surprise me or, say, hey, look what I can do, or yeah, you don't know how to recover from this yet, so let me demonstrate it for you. I don't like that. That being said, I do think there are some benefits in kind of planned surprises as a teaching moment. So, for example, one of my most favorite instructor that taught me to fly the Super Cub, he instilled in me from lesson number 1 that, hey, this is so important that the kind of flying we're doing here, you always need to be prepared for an engine out. We're going to be flying low to the ground, and we're going to be slow, so you need to be prepared for that. And so every single lesson, he would pull the power back to idle, and I would have to go make an emergency approach into some field or something. But I knew that was coming, and not in a way that took away from the lesson of it, but in a way that wasn't counterproductive to just freak me out entirely and make him look cool because he had to take over or something. So there is a difference. There's a good surprise and a bad surprise, but I don't personally want to fly with CFIs that surprise me just for the sake of looking macho. The fourth trait is intervention. How quickly will the CFI intervene into the situation that might need correction? Now, I don't mean this from like a safety perspective, because obviously if you're doing something very dangerous, they need to intervene right away. But if you're doing something that isn't threatening, but it can be a teaching moment, how quickly are they calling you out on it? I have really loved the instructors that might let me go a few steps into making a mistake, even like subtle things. Like, if I'm kind of getting off course or I'm getting off altitude, it's not like the first 50 feet I'm off altitude. They say, hey, watch your altitude. Not like that, but that might let me go 100 feet or go a little bit off course or something. They say, hey, how are we turning on that altitude? They'll just ask you as like a friendly question to kind of get you back in or something. I remember I had a CFI that on my night cross country, it was so turbulent that for part of the flight, he wouldn't even let me have the controls during that part. And I was thinking, I was like, dude, how is this helping me? I mean, I know that like I'm young at that point and you just kind of want to fly and take over or whatever, but like, couldn't this be a teaching moment? We're not in an unsafe situation. So why do you need to intervene that quickly? And so this is just personal preference. I mean, some people like being, reprimanded like right away and corrected right away. I like the ones that tend to let you kind of make a few mistakes and then kind of ask you about it, because I think that this is a lot more real world, because that's how mistakes happen. You'll realize a few minutes later, it's like, oh man, I've been 10 degrees off course or something. And so I think that's a little bit more real life, to wait a few minutes before they intervene if the safety of the situation allows for it. Trait number 5 is reinforcement. Are they a positive reinforcer, a negative reinforcer, or maybe a silent reinforcer? Over the course of time, whether both in flying and then in other things, even like in old football coaches and stuff, I have much preferred positive reinforcement. Now, that's not to say you can't tell me when I'm doing something wrong. Like, totally fine. I want to know that, but don't leave out the fact that like if I did something really good, like I want to know that, because that helps me know, okay, do more of that. That was a good thing. Hey, way to go on that landing. Good job handling that crosswind. Yeah. Hey, good job on the radio. I noticed you're growing in that area. That's always been super motivating to me. But other people like instructors that, you know, as long as they're not saying anything, that means you're doing okay. But I don't really like that. I had a lot of football coaches like that, you know, aren't going to give you a bunch of attaboys. They're just going to, you know, if you screw up, they're going to yell at you. But if they're not saying anything, then you can assume you're doing a good job. I hate that just because it makes me feel like on edge, like, oh man, the next time they say something, like I'm in trouble, I'm in for it, right? I like the ones that are going to open their mouths and tell me what I'm doing well, in addition to telling me what I need to work on. I just am a lot more receptive to that. So you need to see kind of what you resonate with, and it's going to help you in the cockpit a lot. Trait number 6 is listening ability. I really want to find an instructor that can listen really well. You know, people who, you know, once you're asking them a question and they kind of think they know where you're going with that, after a few seconds, they'll just jump in and go ahead and answer the question they thought you were going to ask. That drives me crazy personally. And so I like to have people that are going to listen, because I might be, you know, expressing my insecurity with something that I'm trying to learn, or I might be, you know, having a hard time describing the question, but like, let me finish and I'll get there. I just want someone who's going to listen to me and not cut me off all the time, because, you know, I think in general, both in listening ability and all the other traits we just mentioned, I think the overarching, you know, goal here is to find someone that you feel comfortable with. Because if you're on edge due to any one of these character traits that I just mentioned, if they're putting you on edge, I promise that is going to be detrimental to your learning and your ability to progress as an aviator. Because if you're on edge worrying about your relationship or communication with your CFI, all of that energy going towards worrying about that, it, you know, could otherwise be spent on learning how to fly, which is why you're there in the first place. And so overall, I think you got to find someone you're comfortable with. Now, another follow-up question to this would be, well, how do you know, when you just first start with somebody? And the short answer is you can't. You know, you're gonna have to fly with several to figure it out. But one way to kind of get ahead of that, you know, even if you're just gonna be flying with one instructor, I would ask him or her for a list of some of their students that you can call and ask what their experience was like. You know, I think you can do some research ahead of time, and if an instructor is not willing to do that, or if a flight school is not willing to do that, I would have some further follow-up questions for that. That's sketchy. So do some research ahead of time and try to figure out kind of what their style is, or even like flat out just give them the list I just covered and ask them, hey, where do you feel like you land on the spectrum? And so you can always ask for a different instructor in a flight school or something. Just tell them, like, you are the customer, so you have to remember that. So I think hopefully all of these things are going to help you to find an instructor that can be a wonderful mentor for you in aviation. But I don't think this list is exhaustive, and so I would love to hear from you in the comments as to what other traits you guys look for in CFIs. What are other big kind of no-nos or things that stick out there? Like, man, if a CFI does this, you know, don't walk, run away. I would love to hear that. These are kind of my you know, parameters and traits that I kind of came up with as looking back on my own experience, but I'd love to hear from you. So can't wait to converse with you guys down in the comments. Thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful. See you guys in the next video.